The harsh summer sun beat down on the dusty plains of Colorado Territory in 1872. But Josephine Zeller barely noticed as she stood frozen at the edge of Miller's Creek, watching with horror as the once peaceful stream transformed into a raging torrent before her eyes. The heavy rains that had pounded the mountains for days had finally worked their treachery, sending a wall of muddy water down into the valley, sweeping away everything in its path. Josephine had come west from Boston 3 months ago to take ownership of her late uncle's general store in the small settlement of Ridgepoint. At 22, she'd been determined to make her own way in the world after her parents' passing. Now, as she clutched her drenched skirts, she realized her foolishness in trying to return to town before the storm had fully passed. The road had disappeared beneath the churning water, cutting her off from Ridgepoint. Panic rose in her chest as she backed away from the encroaching flood, her soaked boots sliding in the mud. The sound of hoofbeats barely registered until a deep voice called out over the roar of the water. "Miss, get back from there." Josephine turned to see a rider approaching at a gallop, his horse kicking up mud as it charged toward her. The man sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and lean, his face partially obscured by the brim of his well-worn hat, the creek's breaking its banks. He shouted, pulling his horse to a stop beside her. "You need to get to higher ground." "I was trying to reach town," Josephine explained, having to raise her voice over the din of the rising water. "I didn't realize it would rise so quickly." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his considerable height. His features came into focus, now strong jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes the color of the summer sky, and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore the practical garb of a cattleman: denim trousers, flannel shirt, leather vest, and dusty boots with spurs that jingled softly as he approached. "Name's Lucas Xavier," he said, tipping his hat. "I've got a cabin not far from here. We need to move quickly before we're both washed away." As if to emphasize his point, a massive section of the bank collapsed into the water with a sickening sound. Josephine gasped as muddy water surged toward them, already covering her ankles. "I can't leave," she protested. "My wagon is already half submerged," Lucas finished for her, gesturing to where her small cart was indeed listing dangerously in the rising current, the nervous horse still hitched to it, whinnying in distress. "We need to save your horse first, then worry about the rest." Without waiting for her response, Lucas waded into the swirling water, speaking in low, soothing tones to the frightened animal as he worked to free it from the harness. Josephine watched in admiration as his sure hands made quick work of the buckles and knots despite the rising water. Once the horse was free, Lucas led it to higher ground and secured its reins to a sturdy tree. "It'll be safe enough here until we can come back," he assured her. "Now we need to go." The water was rising faster now, already reaching Josephine's knees, the current threatening to sweep her feet from under her. She took a step toward Lucas's waiting horse and stumbled as the mud gave way beneath her. Lucas was beside her in an instant, steady hands gripping her arms. "Can you ride astride?" he asked, his blue eyes serious. Josephine shook her head. "Not well, and certainly not in this skirt." Lucas nodded once, his jaw set in determination. "Then I'll have to carry you." Before Josephine could protest, he scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped, instinctively wrapping her arms around his neck as he strode through the rising water toward his horse. "Hold tight to the saddle horn," Lucas instructed as he lifted her onto his horse's back. In one smooth motion, he swung up behind her, his chest warm and solid against her back as he reached around her for the reins. "Lean back against me if you need to. Midnight here is steady as they come." As if to prove him wrong, the black stallion danced nervously as another surge of water rushed past, reaching halfway up his legs. Lucas murmured something to the animal that Josephine couldn't hear, and miraculously, the horse calmed. "We'll head northeast," Lucas explained, urging Midnight away from the flooding creek and up the slight incline toward a stand of pines in the distance. "My cabin's built on high ground for just this reason." Josephine nodded, too overwhelmed to speak as they picked their way carefully through the sodden landscape. The rain had stopped, but the damage was already done. Looking back, she could see that the entire valley behind them was rapidly becoming a lake, the floodwaters spreading in every direction. "You're the woman who took over old Henry Zeller's store, aren't you?" Lucas asked after they'd ridden in silence for several minutes. "Yes," Josephine replied, surprised. "He was my uncle. I'm Josephine Zeller. Thought so. Saw you in town last week." "Folks have been talking about the Boston girl who's trying to run a general store on her own." There was no mockery in his tone, just simple observation. "And what do the folks say?" Josephine couldn't help asking. Lucas chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest and into her back. "Some say you're brave. Others say you're foolish. Most are just waiting to see which it turns out to be. And what do you think, Mr. Xavier?" There was a pause before he answered. "I think anyone who leaves everything familiar behind to start fresh deserves a fair chance, Miss Zeller." They crested a small rise, and Josephine could see a sturdy log cabin nestled in a clearing among the pines ahead. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a welcoming sight against the darkening sky. "Someone's at your home," she observed. "My foreman, Charlie. He must have come to check on things when the rain got bad." Lucas guided Midnight toward a covered lean-to beside the cabin that served as a stable. "He's a good man. Been with me since I started the Lazy X 5 years ago." As they approached, the cabin door swung open, and an older man with salt and pepper hair and a thick mustache stepped out, concern etched on his weathered face. "Luke, was wonderin' when you'd show up. Creek's gone wild." He stopped short when he noticed Josephine. "Well now, didn't expect company." Lucas dismounted and reached up to help Josephine down. His hands spanned her waist easily as he lifted her to the ground, and she couldn't help noticing how they lingered for just a moment before he stepped back. "Charlie, this is Miss Josephine Zeller." Found her about to be swept away by Miller's Creek. "Miss Zeller, this is Charlie Hannigan, best foreman in the territory." Charlie touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, pleased to meet you, though wish it were under better circumstances." "Likewise, Mr. Hannigan," Josephine replied, suddenly acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in damp tendrils around her face, and her traveling dress was caked with mud up to her thighs. "Get Midnight settled, will you, Charlie? I'm going to get Miss Zeller inside and see about some dry clothes and hot coffee." "Sure thing, boss." Charlie took the reins and led the stallion toward the stable, casting a curious glance over his shoulder as he went. Lucas guided Josephine to the cabin with a gentle hand at her elbow. "It's not much," he said as he opened the door, "but it's solid and dry." The cabin was indeed simple but well built, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a cheerful blaze already dancing in the grate. A rough-hewn table with 4 chairs stood in the center of the room, and a comfortable-looking armchair was positioned near the fire. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. "Let me find you something dry to wear," Lucas said, crossing to one of the doors. He disappeared briefly and returned with a flannel shirt, a pair of trousers, and a length of rope. "These will be too big, but you can use the rope as a belt. You can change in there." He nodded toward the bedroom he'd just exited. "Thank you," Josephine said, taking the clothes. I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Xavier. Lucas, he corrected with a small smile. Anyone I've carried through floodwaters has earned the right to use my given name. Lucas, she repeated, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warmth of the fire. Then you must call me Josephine. In the privacy of Lucas's bedroom, Josephine changed quickly out of her sodden garments. His clothes engulfed her, but they were blessedly dry. She rolled up the sleeves of the shirt and the legs of the trousers before cinching the rope around her waist. There was a small mirror on the wall, and she did her best to tame her wild hair, twisting it into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she emerged, Lucas had removed his vest and was stirring something in a pot that hung over the fire. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment he simply stared, something unreadable flickering across his face. "Feel better?" he asked finally, returning his attention to the pot. "Much, thank you." Josephine moved closer to the fire, drawn by its warmth. "I hope I'm not imposing too much." "Once the waters recede, that won't be until tomorrow at the earliest," Lucas interrupted gently. "The river broke its banks along the whole valley. Ridge Point will be cut off for at least a day or two." He gestured to the pot. "Stew's almost ready. Not as fancy as what you might be used to in Boston, but it'll warm you up." Josephine smiled. "I've been living above a general store and cooking for myself for 3 months, Mr. Lucas. I'm not as delicate as you might think." That earned her a genuine smile that transformed his serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I'm beginning to see that." The door opened and Charlie entered, stamping mud from his boots. Midnight settled. Rain stopped completely now, but that creek is still rising. "Never seen it this bad." "Any word from town?" Lucas asked, ladling stew into 3 bowls. "Rode out earlier to check. Water hadn't reached Main Street yet, but it was getting close. Sheriff Daniels was organizing folks to shore up with sandbags." Charlie accepted a bowl with a nod of thanks. "Folks at the saloon were saying Old Man Miller's place is already underwater." "Poor Mr. Miller," Josephine said, thinking of the elderly farmer who often brought eggs to sell at her store. "He lives all alone." "Sheriff would have made sure he got out," Lucas assured her, handing her a bowl and a spoon. "Daniels is good that way, looks out for people." They ate in companionable silence, the stew rich and flavorful despite its simplicity. As they finished, Charlie stood and carried his bowl to the wash basin. "If you don't mind, boss, I'll head back to the bunkhouse. The boys will be wondering what's happening." Lucas nodded. "Good idea. Tell them to keep an eye on the north pasture. If the water keeps rising, we might need to move the herd to higher ground." After Charlie had gone, a sudden awkwardness descended on the cabin. Josephine became acutely aware that she was alone with a man she'd just met, wearing his clothes in his home. "I should wash these dishes," she said, standing abruptly. "You're a guest," Lucas protested, but Josephine was already gathering the bowls. "Nonsense. You rescued me and fed me. The least I can do is help with the cleaning up." They fell into an easy rhythm, Josephine washing while Lucas dried and put away. It felt strangely domestic, and Josephine found herself stealing glances at his profile as they worked. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength and dignity that she found herself drawn to. "How long have you been in Colorado territory?" she asked to break the silence. 8 years. Came west after the war with nothing but midnight and the clothes on my back." He put away the last bowl and leaned against the counter. "Worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved every penny, then bought a small parcel of land. Built this cabin myself." "You fought in the war," Lucas nodded, his expression turning somber. "Union cavalry, saw things no man should see." "My father and brother both served," Josephine said softly. "Father came home, but James didn't. I'm sorry." The simple words held genuine sympathy. It took a lot of good men. Is that why you came west, to leave those memories behind? Lucas considered her question. Partly. But mostly I came because I wanted to build something of my own, something that would last. He gestured toward the window, where the darkening landscape was barely visible. The Lazy X is up to 2,000 acres now, not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine. That's impressive, Josephine said sincerely. What about you? What brought you to Ridgepoint? Josephine moved to the fire, holding her hands out to its warmth. After my parents passed influenza 2 winters ago, I was left with their debts and few options. When I received word that Uncle Henry had died and left me his store, it seemed like providence. No husband waiting back east. The directness of the question startled her, but Josephine answered honestly. No, I was engaged once, but he. She hesitated, then decided on the truth. He found a woman with a larger dowry. Lucas frowned. His loss. The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, warmed her more than the fire. What about you? She asked, turning the question back to him. No wife waiting at home wondering where you are in this storm. A shadow passed over Lucas's face. No. There was someone years ago, but she didn't care for ranch life, went back east to her family. Her loss, Josephine echoed, and was rewarded with another of those transformative smiles. You should get some rest, Lucas said after a moment. You can take my bed. I'll sleep out here by the fire. I couldn't possibly. I insist, he said firmly. It's been a long day, and tomorrow might be longer if we need to find a way to get you back to town. Josephine wanted to protest further, but found herself stifling a yawn. The events of the day had indeed left her exhausted. Thank you, she conceded. You're very kind. Not particularly, Lucas replied with a wry twist of his lips. Just doing what my mother raised me to do. She raised you well, then. Josephine moved toward the bedroom door, then paused. Good night, Lucas. Good night, Josephine. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Josephine. The unfamiliar sounds of the cabin, the lingering concern about her store in town, and if she were honest, the awareness of Lucas sleeping just on the other side of the door all conspired to keep her awake. She lay listening to the occasional pop of the fire and the distant sound of water rushing somewhere beyond the cabin walls. Eventually, she rose and wrapped herself in the quilt from the bed, then quietly opened the door. The main room was dim, lit only by the dying embers in the fireplace. Lucas lay on a bedroll near the hearth, one arm flung above his head, his breathing deep and even. In sleep, the lines of his face softened, making him appear younger. Josephine moved to the window, careful not to wake him. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting a silvery glow over the landscape. In the distance, she could see the gleam of water where there should have been none evidence of the creek's rampage. Her store, her new beginning, might even now be underwater. Can't sleep. She turned to find Lucas sitting up, his hair tousled from sleep. I'm sorry if I woke you, she said softly. He shook his head, rising to join her at the window. I'm a light sleeper, old habits from the war. They stood side by side, looking out at the moonlit scene. Lucas was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the clean scent of soap and something uniquely him. Worried about your store? He asked perceptively. Yes, it's all I have. Lucas was quiet for a moment. If the water reached it, we'll rebuild it. Folks around here are good that way. The simple "we" in his statement touched her deeply. You hardly know me, she pointed out. I know enough, he replied, his gaze still on the distant floodwaters. I know you're brave enough to travel across the country alone. I know you're determined enough to take on a business most women wouldn't consider, and I know you didn't panic when facing a flash flood. He turned to look at her then, his eyes catching the firelight. That tells me plenty about the kind of person you are, Josephine Zeller. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of connection that went beyond their brief acquaintance. Josephine felt it like a physical thing, this dawning awareness of him not just as her rescuer, but as a man, one who saw her clearly and valued what he saw. "You should try to get some more sleep," Lucas said, his voice rougher than before. "Dawn will be here before you know it." Josephine nodded, suddenly shy. "Good night." Again. This time, sleep came quickly, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the small window and the smell of coffee and bacon filling the cabin. Josephine dressed quickly in her own clothes, which Lucas had hung by the fire to dry overnight. They were still slightly damp but wearable. When she emerged from the bedroom, Lucas was at the stove, expertly turning bacon in a cast-iron skillet. He looked up when she entered, his eyes warming with appreciation. "Good morning. Coffee's hot if you want some." "Thank you." Josephine helped herself, cradling the mug in both hands and savoring the rich aroma. "Any news about the flooding?" Charlie rode by at first light. "Water's receding already, but the road to town is still underwater in places." Lucas transferred bacon to a plate and cracked eggs into the hot fat. "We'll have breakfast. Then I'll take you as close to town as we can get safely." They ate quickly, the easy camaraderie of the previous evening returning as they discussed the likely damage from the flood and how the community would recover. Lucas told her stories about previous floods he'd seen in the territory, none as severe as this one but all challenging in their own way. "The land out here demands respect," he explained as they cleared away the breakfast things. "It gives generously when treated right, but it can turn on you in an instant if you forget its power." "Like the ocean back home," Josephine observed. "Beautiful but dangerous." Lucas nodded. "Exactly so." As they prepared to leave, Lucas insisted on lending Josephine a coat against the morning chill. It engulfed her small frame, but she was grateful for its warmth as they rode out, once again with Josephine seated in front of Lucas on Midnight's broad back. The landscape had been transformed overnight. What had been green pastureland was now a vast, muddy lake in places. Trees stood partially submerged, and debris littered the higher ground branches, fence posts, and even what looked like pieces of someone's barn. As they approached Ridgepoint, evidence of the flood's destruction became more apparent. Fields were ruined, livestock huddled on islands of dry ground, and a few smaller structures had been completely washed away. "Miller's Creek usually runs about a mile south of town," Lucas explained as they picked their way carefully along a ridge that offered dry passage. "But when it floods like this, it can reach all the way to Main Street." Josephine's heart sank as they rounded a bend and Ridgepoint came into view. The lower part of town was indeed underwater, muddy water lapping at the foundations of buildings. People moved about with purpose, some in boats, others wading through knee-deep water as they salvaged what they could. "My store," Josephine said softly, straining to see through the distance. "It's on the high end of Main Street," Lucas reassured her. "Might have water in the cellar, but the main floor should be above the worst of it." His words proved prophetic. As they rode into town, they discovered that while the southern end of Main Street was flooded, the water had stopped just short of the general store. A group of townspeople had created a barricade of sandbags that had helped divert the flow. Sheriff Daniels spotted them as they approached and waded through ankle-deep water to meet them. "Miss Zeller, we were worried when you didn't come back yesterday." "She got caught by the creek," Lucas explained, dismounting and lifting Josephine down. "I found her just before the water took her wagon." "Lucky thing," the sheriff said, giving Lucas a knowing look that made Josephine blush. "Whole valley's a mess. Old man Miller lost his barn and most of his chickens, and the Wilsons' place is gone completely. Is everyone safe?" Josephine asked anxiously. "So far as we know. Some bruises and scrapes from the rescue work, but no deaths reported." The sheriff gestured toward the store. "Your place fared better than most, Miss Zeller. Some of the ladies took the liberty of moving things from your cellar up to the main floor when the water started rising." "That was very kind of them," Josephine said, overwhelmed by the community's thoughtfulness. "That's how we do things out here," Lucas said quietly beside her. Neighbors look out for each other. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as the town recovered from the flood. Josephine opened her store as a gathering point where people could come for supplies, many of which she provided on credit to those who had lost everything. Lucas appeared daily, sometimes with Charlie and other ranch hands, helping to clear debris, repair damaged buildings, and rescue stranded livestock. Each evening, as the work wound down, Lucas would find his way to the general store. Sometimes he brought fresh meat or vegetables from his ranch. Other times, he simply came to sit on the porch with Josephine, watching as the sunset painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was on one such evening, a week after the flood, that their relationship shifted once again. They sat side by side on the porch steps, tired but satisfied with the day's progress. "Mr. Wilson has decided to rebuild on higher ground," Josephine reported, having heard the news from Mrs. Wilson herself. "They're staying with her sister until the new house is ready." Lucas nodded. "Wise choice. Charlie and I rode out to their old place today. Nothing left but the chimney stack and a few roof beams." A comfortable silence fell between them. Josephine was acutely aware of Lucas beside her, his shoulder occasionally brushing against hers as he shifted position. Over the past week, she'd come to know him better, his quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, his wry humor that emerged when he was relaxed. She'd also come to recognize the growing attraction between them, though neither had spoken of it. "Your wagon's been recovered," Lucas said eventually. "Charlie found it caught in some trees about a mile downstream. It's damaged but repairable." "That's wonderful news," Josephine replied. "I was afraid I'd lost it completely." "It got me thinking," Lucas continued, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, "about how quickly things can change. How what seems solid and certain can be washed away in an instant." Josephine's breath caught at the serious tone in his voice. "Yes, the flood certainly taught us all that lesson. It's not just the flood I'm thinking about." Lucas turned to look at her directly, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "A week ago, you were a shopkeeper I'd only glimpsed from afar, and I was just another rancher passing through town occasionally. Now," Josephine prompted when he paused. "Now I find myself riding into town each day not because there's work to be done, though there is, but because I want to see you." The admission came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding it back. "Because when I'm not with you, I'm thinking about you." Josephine's heart raced. "I've been thinking about you too," she confessed. "More than I probably should." Lucas's expression softened. "I don't want to presume anything. You've only been in Ridgepoint a few months. You're still establishing yourself, your independence. The last thing you need is some rough cattleman complicating things." "Perhaps," Josephine agreed, feeling a smile tug at her lips, "but complications aren't always unwelcome." Lucas reached for her hand then, his calloused fingers gentle as they enclosed hers. "What I'm trying to say, not very eloquently, is that I'd like to call on you properly, Josephine, if you'd permit it." Joy bloomed in Josephine's chest, warm and bright. "I'd like that very much, Lucas." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished, he leaned closer. Josephine met him halfway, her eyes drifting closed as his lips found hers in a tender, questioning kiss. It was brief but perfect, a promise of things to come. When they parted, Lucas kept hold of her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It's getting late and there's still plenty of work waiting tomorrow." "Will you come for dinner tomorrow evening?" Josephine asked. "I make a passable beef stew, though probably not as good as yours." "I'd be honored." That dinner was the first of many over the following months. Summer mellowed into autumn, and as the land recovered from the flood, Josephine and Lucas's relationship deepened and flourished. He taught her to ride properly, laughing with genuine delight when she mastered posting to a trot. She introduced him to the joys of classic literature, reading aloud by lamplight on quiet evenings. The townspeople watched their courtship with approving eyes. About time Lucas Xavier found himself a good woman, Mrs. Peterson declared one afternoon as she selected fabric in the store. "Man's been alone too long." "Now, Gertrude, don't go pushing the girl," her husband admonished, but he winked at Josephine as he said it. As Christmas approached, bringing with it the first heavy snows, Lucas invited Josephine to the Lazy X for a special dinner. He sent Charlie with his best buggy to collect her, the horses adorned with jingling bells for the festive occasion. The cabin had been transformed. Evergreen boughs decorated the rafters, their fresh scent filling the air. Candles glowed in every window, and the table was set with what was clearly Lucas's best china, probably unused for years. "This is beautiful," Josephine breathed as she entered, unwinding her scarf. Lucas stood by the fire, dressed in his Sunday best clean black trousers, a white shirt, and a vest she recognized as new. He looked nervous, his usual confidence replaced by an endearing uncertainty. "I wanted it to be special," he said, taking her coat. "I've never been much for decorating, but Charlie's wife helped." Dinner was a feast: roast venison, potatoes, carrots from the root cellar, fresh bread, and for dessert, an apple pie that Lucas admitted with a grin had been contributed by Charlie's wife. As they finished the meal, Lucas grew quiet, toying with his coffee cup. Josephine waited patiently, sensing he had something important to say. Finally, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been thinking a lot about that day by the creek," he said, his voice low and serious. "About how differently things might have turned out if I hadn't decided to ride that way, or if I'd been just a few minutes later." "Providence," Josephine suggested. "Maybe so." Lucas squeezed her fingers gently. "Whatever it was, I thank God for it every day, meeting you, knowing you. It's changed everything for me, Josephine." He rose from his chair and, still holding her hand, knelt beside her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. "I rode all the way to Denver for this," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my grandmother's, but I had it sized for you." Josephine's free hand flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "I love you, Josephine Zeller. I think I started falling for you the moment I carried you across that flooded creek. Will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Josephine whispered, then louder. "Yes, Lucas, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger where it settled as if it had always belonged there. Then he rose and drew her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her as he kissed her with all the love and promise of their future together. Spring came to Colorado territory in a burst of wildflowers and green grass, washing away the last memories of winter. On a perfect May afternoon, with Miller's Creek once again a peaceful stream and the rebuilt town of Ridgepoint festooned with ribbons and flowers, Josephine Zeller became Josephine Xavier, in a ceremony attended by the entire community. The general store remained Zeller's, though now it was run by Mr. Peterson's nephew, under Josephine's occasional supervision. She divided her time between town and the Lazy X, where she had transformed Lucas's bachelor cabin into a true home, with curtains at the windows and a garden that promised summer vegetables. On their first anniversary, Lucas surprised Josephine with a gift, the deed to the land adjoining the cabin, where construction had already begun on a larger house. "For our growing family," he explained with a meaningful glance at her slightly rounded belly. Josephine placed his hand over the spot where their child grew. "I never imagined when I came west that I would find not just independence but love as well. And I never imagined when I rode out to check on flooding that day that I'd find the other half of my heart stranded by a creek." Lucas kissed her tenderly. "Sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected circumstances. Like a river breaking its banks," Josephine agreed, nestling into his embrace. "And a cowboy carrying his lady love to safety," Lucas finished, holding her close as they watched the sun set over the land that had brought them together.